How's it going, guys? It's Poetry Stud, and welcome to a little bit of a one-off video where I'm going to be talking about which Paradox game is for you. So this is going to be for people who might play strategy games but aren't necessarily into the grand strategy game genre. So we're going to be talking about the current generation of Paradox's grand strategy games, and we're going to be talking about all of them, including a little bit about Stellaris, although I'm not going to go into as great of depth into that one. Anywho, so currently, at the time of this video being made, the current generation of Paradox Grand Strategy games includes Crusader Kings 2, Europa Universalis 4, Victoria 2, and Hearts of Iron 4. And they're, the next game to possibly be coming up with a newer version will be Victoria 3, but that's probably not going to be for like another year. So hopefully this video will stay in date until then. Maybe I'll make a new one when that comes out. Anywho, let's go ahead and just hop right in. We're going to go by chronological order, so starting with Crusader Kings 2. If you don't want to watch any individual parts of this because you own that game already, I'll have like links down below that with timestamps to where each individual game section begins, and I'll also have descriptions of the games in the description of the video. So anywho, let's go ahead and get in, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. But anyways, so Crusader Kings 2 is the first one. With Ck2, as I'm going to call it from now on, it starts... If you have the DLC, the earliest DLC, I believe it starts in 735. I actually don't even know because I don't own the the DLC. Let me go ahead and look it up real quick. 769. That's it. So if you have the Charlemagne DLC or the Horse Lords DLC, they actually take you all the way back to 769. So you can play from 769 or from 1066 if you only own the base game, all the way until 1453, which is a long period of time. And so a lot of people that play EU4 that come to CK2 are a little put off by a couple things, and so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about that because I think it's actually a really great game, but you have to approach it with a different mindset. So this is going to be a little bit of a description of how I would describe it. So first off, you're not necessarily playing as a country or a civilization like you are in some other games, some other strategy games. You can't take the Civ mindset of a civilization. You can't take the country mindset of a EU4 or Vicky 2. You can't take sort of just the war aspect of Hearts of Iron 4. It's very individual focused. So with each of the games, I'm going to talk about the role of the player, like the sort of game role-playing role. So in Crusader Kings 2, you are playing the role of a ruler in the Middle Ages and a dynasty to a larger extent. So you're playing as a ruler, not a country. You're not playing as a duchy, a county, or anything. You're playing as a ruler. So it focuses a lot on the character and sort of the stories of that character and his family. That's the main thing. It's a dynasty builder in a large part. So you don't really care. You might be like the weakest country with quotations because you're not really a country. Countries didn't even exist at this time period, really. You're not really a country in this game as much, or I forgot what I was saying actually. If you are the weakest county in the world, you could still be in the strongest dynasty in the world because it's about the dynasty and and you could also still be having a lot of fun because it's also about the character. So there's a lot of role play elements of CK2, a lot of sort of arranging marriages with people, and then maybe like going on a vendetta against people if they killed your family and stuff. Having rivals is a fun part. All this sort of stuff that really makes it a unique game that I think has a lot of depth that some of the other games don't have. So while it is a bit different from something like EU4, it's also very fun. You can play it with a sort of like land grabbing mentality, but it's not as fun, honestly. So anyway, so that's CK2. The ultimate goal again is building a dynasty and not necessarily an empire, although you certainly can do that too. But you're building a dynasty and sort of following the story of your family throughout the ages as stuff is changing in Europe, and it's kind of cool how that is portrayed. Anywho, I'm not going to talk about like the DLC aspects at all, really, but yeah, basically we're just going to go through the rest of them kind of like that. So EU4 is the next up, Europa Universalis 4. This is personally my favorite of the games, but I like all of them. So Europa Universalis 4 is, in my opinion, risk times 1,000. It is... You do play as the country, not as an individual like in CK2. You're playing as a country or nation or whatever, a nation state in the early age of nation states. So kind of the roleplay role of this is that you're playing as the advisors of the country, kind of. You're making decisions for the country. You're not necessarily the monarch. because you can like do stuff without a monarch. I don't know. You're kind of just playing like the top of the nation. You're making decisions for the country. So you have one thing that's cool about EU4 is that you have a lot of different ways you can go. For one, you can play in like any area of the world, which is, you know, pretty cool. In Ck2, you actually can't. You can only play in Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and India. You can, as far as like what you want to do, there's a whole bunch of stuff to do. You can go with a warrior route, you can go with a trade route and like not expand at all with war. You can go colonization, expand overseas, and also do some land conquest at home. You can do diplomacy and sort of try to marry people. You can play the HRE, you can play in China, you can play a whole bunch of different types of games. There's lots of mechanics that fit every little area of the map. You can play a horde nation, you could play anything really, you know. There's some cool stuff, and that's one of the reasons that I really like is that you can set a whole bunch of different goals for yourselves, and it's very sandboxy in that you can set all these goals for yourself that might be different depending on where you are. You know, if you're playing in the HRE, you're going to be doing slow expansion. You're probably going to take different idea groups than if you're playing in, you know, as Mongolia and you're trying to eat all of the Central Asian steppe. You know, there's just vast amounts of difference that you can have between different parts of the world and different sorts of achievement runs and stuff. Beyond that, there are a lot of cool achievements and challenges to go for. So I have over 1,000 hours in EU4, and yet I'm still only like a third of the way done with the achievements. So that's pretty crazy, and I still love it just as much as ever. Once you start to learn it, it kind of has a different feel, but it's still a good one. It's still one that's fun. You start to get more into like a sort of like a I don't know, what would it be, like a Zen mindset where you're just like, you know, conquering land. It's pretty fun because you actually understand what you're doing. So yeah, so EU4, I would say it's really good. It's like Risk times 1,000. It's more like based off of, well, if you didn't know, actually, Europa Universalis originally the original one was based off of a board game that was bought, like the rights to the board game were bought by Paradox. And so then they made some video games out of it, and it kind of has that feel still. Lots of stuff is determined by dice rolls and stuff like that, and so it's a pretty cool game. I really like it. Europa Universalis 4 is fun. So anyways, we're going to go and move on to Victoria 2. So Victoria 2 is probably it's definitely the least played out of this current generation of Paradox games. Grand strategy games, that is. So Victoria 2 is from, I forgot to say, Europa Universalis 4 is from 1444 to 1821. I completely forgot to say that. So Victoria 2 it picks up where EU4 leaves off in 1836, and it goes to 1936. So it's just 100 years, and it's actually the shortest of all the Paradox games in terms of ticks. Hearts of Iron 4 is actually less years, but it goes by hour because it's World War II, where hours make a difference. So it actually has more ticks than Victoria 2. Victoria 2 is the shortest one. You are, in the 1800s and a little bit of the 1900s, during a time of great change and stuff. You have industrialization, you have the American Civil War, you have the Franco-Prussian War, the unification of Italy, the unification of Germany, or kind of just the formation of it, not unification as much. You have World War I. You have all these crazy things that sort of change the landscape of the world. And, you have Japan rising as an imperial power. All this sort of stuff is happening during this time period. So it's a really cool thing that Paradox has tried to do with it. And I say try to because there are still some flaws with it. However, Vicky 2 is sort of the, the flagship grand strategy game in terms of like the depth it has. I would say lots of people tote it to be like the best one of the current generation. I don't know if I agree, but I think it is actually the most sort of, what's the word you'd say, like comprehensive, well packaged. Like EU4, I think I like more, but I don't think it's necessarily better than Vicky 2. So Vicky 2 is a really good game and stuff. So anyways, so I would overall say it's 19th century economy simulator. Geez. The role play aspect again is the role of the spirit of a nation, almost in quotations, the spirit of a nation. And I saw this on the subreddit somewhere, the Paradox Plaza subreddit somewhere. Someone said this, and I was like, yeah, that actually fits. So you're actually kind of playing the spirit of a nation. It's similar to EU4, but it's more neutral in terms of the government. You're not actually actively trying to control the government. It's not saying that you are the monarch or the monarch's councils, because lots of times you aren't playing as a monarchy. You're playing as a republic or a constitutional monarchy or something. But yeah, so you're playing as the spirit of the nation, and I do say that because unlike EU4, there's not really any negatives associated with getting forced to switch government types and stuff. There's no like disasters for that happening, although you do have rebels. But even if the rebels fire, it's not like it's a game over or anything like that. You just switch government types and stuff. It can be, there are some malices, like prestige-wise, but still, you're playing the spirit of the nation, and it doesn't really try to shift you in any one direction for government, which is pretty cool. So the gameplay loop in Victoria 2 takes a few different things. I would say the largest one is economic/industrial. So building up your industry, building factories and stuff, you can go into full-on spreadsheet mode if you really want to with the trade. You can look at which trade goods are going up in price worldwide. You can figure out what you need to do that. That can direct your conquest. Maybe you'll conquer some territories that have specific goods, because that brings you in the goods you need to make other goods, to produce, to sell, to get more money, so that your economy can be better and you can have more troops. It's like pretty complex how everything loops up. Military is a thing, like I just mentioned. You can take states and stuff, but it's a little bit less emphasized than EU4. It's much harder to take a whole bunch of land. You might only be able to do one, like 2 wars every 10 years, I would say, or something like that, maybe less, depending on the type of the war. And like if you're trying to grow in Europe, it's very slow. If you're trying to grow in like Asia and stuff, it can be a little quicker because you can establish protectorates and stuff. But in general, it's pretty slow. But of course, there's a lot of population. So one state, especially if it's in like Italy or Germany or something, one state can be super population dense and like really benefit your country, and in Britain and stuff. So it's a pretty cool thing that happens there with the economic loop. And like I said, one thing that's cool is that you can go full-on spreadsheet mode, but you don't have to. If you're looking for a game where you want some light economy gameplay, you can actually set certain goods to be automatic and some goods to be manual, or them all to be automatic if you really want. And then you can just focus on directing it with the sort of the factories and stuff, but you don't actually have to worry about selling the goods and whatnot, which is kind of cool. The military, you have to do about the same amount of micro as Europa Universalis 4, but they basically have the exact same format of combat with the rolls and everything. I think there's a slightly different sized dice, so there's different rolls. There's also more of like an entrenchment sort of like battlefront type thing, but normally that doesn't really matter if you don't have that many armies, and there are some issues with it, like it is a little annoying at some points in time, but it's still pretty fun. Beyond that, there's one other major like gameplay aspect that I think I haven't touched on, which is imperialism and colonization. So there is a point once you reach the year 1870, after you have you've had like 35 years to sort of build up your country economically and military wise, and naval wise, which is a big part of this, and then you go into imperialism mode, and all of Africa opens up basically, or most of it, like 75% of Africa is suddenly colonizable. It doesn't start out previously with anything there, and then you just start colonizing it and grabbing huge swaths of land with huge amounts of population, really good exotic goods like tropical wood for luxury furniture, and then like silk and coffee and all these things, So all of a sudden you start grabbing this land, and it's really cool because then there's sort of like colonial crises and wars that you can fight over colonies with other great powers and stuff. Beyond that, there is all the system of great powers similar to like what they've added to Europa Universalis 4. I think actually they took some inspiration from Vicky 2, because Vicky 2 is getting up there in age, of course. But like there's a great power list, and the great powers sort of they're the only ones with the ability to colonize, as well as secondary powers, which is 9 through 16 in the rankings. And it takes the rankings from... hold on, my screen just turned off. All right, we're good. It takes the rankings from your military, your industry, and your prestige scores added up. I'm not going to get into that. You can look up some guides on Vicky 2 if you want to know more about that. But in any case, so it's kind of cool. There's great powers or sort of different spheres of influence which affect how cheaply you get goods and stuff. All this sort of stuff. Imperialism, colonization, industry building up, military, changes in military. But you start off with like Napoleonic era warriors or soldiers, and then by the end you're dealing with tanks and airplanes, and that's pretty sick. Anywho, so the general gameplay loop of Vicky 2 is to like form nations and like bring your nation forward into a new era, work towards a new era, work towards different goals. Maybe if you're in Italy, you want to unify Italy, and same in Germany. And I think it's a little more historical and sort of a little more railroaded than EU4 into specific tracks. But that actually is kind of cool because you can recreate history and sort of live through it, and also having a minor effect or sometimes a major effect on the way it goes. But you can try, and it makes it a little more of a challenge to try to alter history, which is kind of fun. Anywho, moving on to the last grand strategy game that we're going to officially consider, Hearts of Iron 4. We might actually talk a little bit about Hearts of Iron 3 and a little bit about Stellaris after this, so keep that in mind. But we're going to talk about the last actual big current gen game right now, Hearts of Iron 4. So Hearts of Iron 4 is a World War II simulator. That's basically all it is. So in in Hearts of Iron 4, you're playing as the role of a country in World War II, including both political and industrial aspects, but mostly focusing on war. And hopefully they'll add more focus on war, honestly, because right now it's a little too much on the political and industrial. But anyways, so the gameplay loop of Hearts of Iron 4 is a little bit different than the other ones because of the fact that you only have a few years to really build up your country. There's manpower, but pretty much with your manpower, you have what you're starting with and a little more. You don't actually get that much more throughout the whole rest of the game because of the fact that, there's only like 10 years. People don't have a whole bunch of time to make babies and let those babies grow up in that time period, in that time frame. So anyways, the gameplay loop is, there's two phases, sort of. The first is sort of developing the industry and sort of the loadout of your country with your research and like the way your units are formatted, and you start training those units. Then you transition, and you also have like political stuff going on this whole time, which is kind of cool. One of the interesting things that they've done is they've added focus trees, which allow you to sort of take your nation in a more focused direction, it has negatives and positives, and that's a whole other video's topic. But anyways, so that's kind of what you do. You're doing that the whole time while you're at war and before. But before the war especially, you're going to be sort of picking, do you want to stick with the Allies, stick with the Axis, go with the Comintern, go with whoever, go on your own? There's a whole bunch of things you decide and stuff while you're doing your industry, while you're doing your research, and kind of focusing in your country on what you're going to be using. So then you transition to phase 2, which is once the war starts, whether that is early because you've declared your own wars, or whether you have been pulled into World War II, actual World War II, or whether you're on the Chinese front war against the Japanese. But in any case, World War II will start eventually using these cool sort of tension mechanics, which you'll learn about if you watch any guides or play the game at all. I'm not going to go into detail again. But yeah, so then you go into war, and war is sort of focused on front lines combat in World War II, and that's kind of what the whole point of it is, having different front lines, moving along with these front lines. It's a lot different than any of the other games, because in Ck2 and EU4, you pretty much just take your armies and dump them on forts and provinces. Vicky 2 is similar to that, with a little more of like a front lines aspect and forts and stuff, but not really. Hearts of Iron 4 is full-on front lines. If you have any gaps in your front, you're basically screwed. It's not like EU4 and stuff. You have to actually have troops lining up your whole front line, or you're going to be in a bad position, unless you have a trap plan or something, So yeah, front lines combat, largely it's like sort of micro, maneuvering with what you've got and trying to outmaneuver your enemies, especially if you are down on manpower compared to them, or down on quality of troops. And sort of maneuvering in these close situations and using your terrain and the cities and the rivers around you to defeat other countries. And it's pretty fun. However, there are some issues with Hearts of Iron 4 in its current state. It has a lot of issues with the AI just being pretty bad, like pulling away from fronts completely and stuff, and it makes it too easy and stuff. So the game actually has a lot of issues, I would say, in its current state. And this is as of the end of April, the beginning of June 2017. So I 100% know it's going to get better. So if you're watching this in the late 2017, early mid 2018, I would say take a look at the recent reviews on Steam of the game, or look at the subreddit, paradoxplaza subreddit. Figure out what people are thinking of the game now. Comment on this video and I'll give you my opinion. But it probably is going to be a lot better. And it's still good as is. I actually have like 200 hours in the game, and I didn't even realize that till a few days ago. I was like, holy cow. But yeah, so it's in an early-ish state, but it has a lot of good potential, and has a lot of good potential for future expansions, although I hope that they sort of figure out a different way to pack together the expansions. But yeah, so the positives of it, the negatives are that it's a little bit unpolished right now, a little too easy. The positives are that it's very focused on one period of time, which makes you feel like your decisions pre-war really matter and have a lot of weight because of the fact that you're only going to be able to go with one route in some ways, so you're not going to be able to backtrack. You have to go all in on certain things. And there is some replayability because of the focus trees and the different paths you can take and stuff. However, I wish there was honestly more weight with some stuff. I wish that the game was a little, and this kind of goes along with the game being too easy. If it was a little bit harder, you would be able to feel like your decisions made even more of a difference, because then you're going to war against these countries, whereas now it's like, oh, no big deal, it's kind of easy. Then you'd be like, oh, I barely won by the skin of my teeth, and now I'm not going to be able to do much else because I'm out of manpower. And so you feel like you did a whole bunch, but you only did as much as you could do, and now the rest of the war is going to be fought not by you. And that's one thing that Hearts of Iron 4 and 3 both, Hearts of Iron 3 had and Hearts of Iron 4 doesn't have, which is the fact that you don't necessarily feel like you're limited. You don't feel like you're part of a bigger picture. You feel like you're the only player with a whole bunch of other shells of AI players. Whereas in Hearts of Iron 3, which we might talk about in a second, you kind of felt like you're only doing as much as you can, and then everything else is going to fall to your allies, who are going to do pretty much what they needed to do to be historical. So you try to do what you can, and then you're satisfied when you've done what you can, even if it's not like a whole world conquest or anything. So anyways, that's Hearts of Iron 4, kind of long there. I am going to talk about Hearts of Iron 3 in a second, but let's talk about Stellaris first. Stellaris is not necessarily a grand strategy game. I would say it's not, but it has grand strategy game elements. It is made by Paradox, though, so we're going to include it here. Stellaris is a 4X game. The 4Xs are exploration, expansion, extermination. I don't remember the fourth one. But anywho, so it's kind of like Civ, essentially. It's Civ in space, and it is a really, really fun game. It also had some issues at launch. A lot of those have been dealt with. There are still some. Replayability is the big one, just making you feel like there's a lot of, making you feel like the lore is worth getting into in these randomly generated universes and empires and stuff. That's one of the big things. But anywho, Stellaris is sort of a space 4X game, like I already said, where you are controlling the civilization. So it kind of takes that role of a civilization, kind of like Civ does. You're leading your civilization essentially from the point at which you find interstellar travel up until the point where you control the whole galaxy and stuff. And so whether that means you're going to join a federation and sort of work with other people in the galaxy to keep the galaxy unified, or whether you're going to go off on your own and conquer everyone. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can take your empires, and that's one thing that's really cool. You can pretty much choose to be, you can literally be people that eat other civilizations and stuff when you take over their planets, or you can be someone who is a pacifist and doesn't expand at all, but lets everyone into their empire with open borders. There's so many things to do, so many cool customization features, different planet types, different ways to run your empire. It's a pretty cool game, I would say. In its current state, the biggest thing is that there's not a whole bunch of reason for you to really start to learn about the backstories of these other empires when you meet them. When you're in space and stuff, and it's just random countries with random names, you don't really care. And so you don't really feel like sometimes the games don't necessarily pull you in. You don't necessarily feel the urge to keep going as much as you do with EU4, when there's countries that other players have had a whole bunch of time to, it's like, whereas in EU4, you're attacking France, and you're like, oh, I have to beat France. They're the enemy, you know? In this game, it's like, oh, this is the Klingon Federation. You know, who are they? I don't even remember them. You know, it's not as relatable, I guess. That's one of the downsides. However, like I said, the upsides are really, really cool amounts of customizability and sort of freedom in how you take your empire. Beyond that, the graphics are amazing, music is amazing, you can watch the battles happening in real time, which is cool. Some games, they cheat out on that, like EU4 and stuff. Not really, but you know what I mean. You can see the troops, the ships flying around shooting at each other, and it's all modeled one-to-one with what's actually happening stat-wise. There's lots of cool ways to like build ships. You actually custom design your ships, which is something I've always loved about space games like this. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. Like, I don't know, do you guys ever, any of you guys remember the MMO, sort of like browser MMO game Galaxy Online, I think it was? I kind of liked that game. It was kind of bad, but at the same time I kind of liked it because you could like customize your ship loadouts and stuff. But anyways, so it's pretty cool. Pretty good game, I would say. It's still being worked on as well, but there's been a lot of positive improvements, and there is a lot of cool stuff to do with it. You could definitely, if you like space games and you like 4X games like Civ, you should definitely give it a shot, even if you're not into the other grand strategy games. So anywho, let's talk about Hearts of Iron 3 for like 2 minutes real quick as compared to Hearts of Iron 4. I've never played the earlier ones like Darkest Hour and Hearts of Iron 2. I know those are also considered really good, but Hearts of Iron 3 has a lot of stuff similar to Hearts of Iron 4. Like, you build up your industry and stuff. You take your country in a direction politically, although you don't have nearly as much freedom. It's mostly going to happen historically. But what I think sets Hearts of Iron 3 apart as a little bit of like a more solid experience in the core gameplay loop is the fact that Hearts of Iron 3, it's harder and stuff. As simply as that. Like, basically, like I talked about, Hearts of Iron 3, the thing that really made it feel good is that you, when you're, say you're Yugoslavia, and you're going to try to take over Hungary. In Hearts of Iron 4, that's super easy. You just bum rush them right in the beginning, or, you know, the first couple of years, and they can't do anything. Plus, the AI is terrible, so you're going to beat them really easily. However, Hearts of Iron 3, if you're Yugoslavia, you're not going to be able to build up that quickly, which I think is one thing. That's probably one of the reasons that I think Hearts of Iron 3 is a little harder and a little better, is because it's harder to build up stuff. You don't get whole new units that easily and that often. So you build up a few new units, and then you prepare for war, and it's somewhat of a grind, but then you go to war, and you really have to work. Every single engagement really matters. So when you've finally beat up Hungary or someone of equivalent size like Romania, you get their industry and stuff, and it's really helpful. It's a huge jump, but at the same time, you spend a lot of manpower, so you're not going to be able to do that much against like Germany or whoever else. So it's a little bit different with that, in that when you're going to war with people, it's a much more sort of like deliberate feeling. When you go to war, someone's not like, whatever, we'll just beat them real quickly and then go on to the next person. It's much more like, this might be the last war I'm able to realistically do because of the fact that my manpower is so low, and it's so difficult to even take out one person like this. Every war sort of has more weight. And because of that, when you're done with the wars, then, and the whole war in general, you feel like you're part of a greater movement, a greater sort of mass historical event, which it was. It was a historical like time period with a ton of different facets. You had different fronts and different wars and stuff. And so you might be, and so in Hearts of Iron 3, it does a really good job of making you feel like you're one front in this big war, while if you're Yugoslavia joining the Allies, it's like the other allies are elsewhere doing their own thing, and you can see them, and they actually normally go fairly historical with what they're doing, whereas normally, you're going to only be able to do so much ahistorical unless you are one of those great powers. So it's a much more sort of like satisfying game in its current state, but the graphics are pretty bad. But yeah, it's much more immersing, and sort of like you feel like everything has more weight when you're doing it. So anyways, quick little tip that you might want to try out Hearts of Iron 3 if that sounds like more of your jam. It's much more micro-y as well, so be warned. Anywho, that's all. How long has this been? Oh god, almost 30 minutes. That's okay. I knew this video was going to be pretty long. If you only watched a couple of those things, then, maybe you already own the other games or something, but if not, feel free to check out the individual descriptions I'll have in the description of what each of these games sort of has. I have a little outline that I've been using to sort of organize my thoughts, and Each of the games has a different feel and stuff. Each of them has a different sort of focus. I hope that this has been a helpful video in determining which one you might like and which one might sort of be the game for you. Feel free to check out, any of my other series that I have on each of these games. Every single one of these I at least have one series of on YouTube. All of them have mods too. That's another thing. All of them have mods that can drastically change up the way the game is played, especially like Victoria 2 and EU4 have some really, really cool changing mods. Ck2 as well, actually. Ck2 is like freaking Game of Thrones mods, and like a Ck2 also has like a After the End post-apocalyptic America mod. That one's really, really fun. There's a whole bunch of different things you could find mod-wise for all of these games, so feel free to check those out. Anywho, hit me up with any comments you might have, with any questions you might have. I will love to answer any of your questions about all the games. I'm not an expert in any of them except maybe EU4. You could say I'm an expert at this point. But I know enough to be able to tell you sort of the basics and what you might want to expect. Anywho, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for more. Feel free to check out those other series. Like I said, it does help the channel. And I hope this was a helpful video in telling you which game you might want to play. So with all those things in mind, hope you've enjoyed. And until the next time or whatever other video you watch, bye-bye.